Oh hey everyone! Sorry, I've just been getting antsy at how long it takes to finish watching something. Don't you guys feel the same way too? Man, I hope there would be some guy talking for over 5 minutes. In between Ultraman seasons, there is the off season, which is the time of the year in between Ultra shows and there's a recap show running instead. Thus, this usually pertains people being sad that the Ultraman show is too short and wish for the good old days of 50 episode counts. And then, there's people on the other crowd who say that 50 episodes is too much, it's all filler, and stuff like that, and as you might expect, some wars may be initiated. Of course, I'm exaggerating, and people bring this up for other reasons too, but now it's a good time to discuss how long should an Ultraman series be? In order to get down to it, I've done some research and interviewed some people.
I would say around 40 meters long would be good.
About 2 football fields long.
You know what? These guys are onto something. Okay, we need some context first. Ultraman is a franchise that usually has annual TV shows. This implies that a particular series is meant to sustain the year for the brand, such as in marketing campaigns or the merchandise sales. This isn't exclusive to Ultraman, of course. It's the same way for Kamen Rider or Super Sentai as well as some other series like Pretty Cure or Digimon or Pokemon. So naturally, the shows usually last for a year on television, which means around 48 or 50 episodes and so. For a long time, this applied to Ultraman as well, with some special exceptions such as Ultraman, Cosmos and Max. However, Ultraman went on hiatus for a bit, and when they came back, they were owned by Bandai and Fields. Long story short, the change in management and new financial accommodations meant that Ultraman shows would now only run for around half of a year, meaning half the episode count of previous shows, which is about 25 episodes. So what's the issue? We have to look at both sides here to the favor of long series or for short series, as in what do people associate with in a longer or shorter series. In a series with a 50 episode range, which we will call the longer series, they aired for a full year. In these kinds of shows, there's less or very little involvement of a main story, often having standalone episodes with a Monster of the Week format. Series like Ultra 7, Ultraman Ace, Return of Ultraman, Ultraman Tiga, the original Ultraman, etc. Basically nearly any main show before Mega Monster Battle. In a shorter series of around 25 episodes, they air for half a year, typically from July to January. For these ones, there's usually a heavier emphasis on a main plotline, a higher preference on recurring antagonists' involvement over standalone stories. These are any show of the Ultraman Ginga. Of course, these are heavy generalizations and there's some overlap in the elements found, like Ultraman Nexus being a longer series, but still having a tight overarching story. Now usually, you hear the clamor for wanting a longer series again. Let's go back to the times when Ultraman Z and Ultraman Decker ended. A lot of people voiced that they wished that these shows had been longer. The reasons that were given for wanting a longer series was that there would have been more chances to flesh out the charming characters. Characters like Bako, Yuka, Vice Captain Kaizaki, and Ryumon had a lot more potential and we could have seen more of their personalities in a higher episode count. Longer serialized series like Ultraman and Ultraman Tiga had several focus episodes for each main cast member, showing many facets of their personalities. Another argument for a longer series is that it gives the show some time to breathe. Ultraman Decker had a few really good standalone episodes that weren't really tied to its main plot, such as the Lord Ragon episode, the Neo Megas episode, and the Gregor Grace episode, which put more focus on the actions of the side characters and the world that they live in. Unfortunately, personally I feel that once Decker went full focus on the Agam's plot, it suffered a bit from not giving itself enough breathing room, and kind of left its focus on the other characters behind. And of course, people just kinda start missing the show when it ends fast, especially since other tokusatsu shows like Kamen Rider and Super Sentai still have stuff going on due to their full year runs. But some series are simply meant to be shorter. For example, I wouldn't have wanna watch Orb Origin Saga for more than 12 episodes. That said, having a shorter series has its upsides too. I think that with a smaller episode count, you have the opportunity to change up the status quo faster and make for a more interesting narrative within its overarching plot. Ultraman Decker pulled this off really well in my opinion halfway through, with a plot twist appearance that came out of nowhere that still made total sense. Ultraman Trigger did it okay too, with the role change of Ignis as another Ultraman in the story. I suppose if done right, a shorter episode count allows for less room for things to just drag on. That is, if done well. The problem with a lot of stories, not limited to just Ultraman of course, is that they tend to want to save the actual things that matter to the plot till the very end, at like 3 episodes, or even worse, leaving all the reveals and explanations until the last episode. This just doesn't give the show enough time to resolve and explore things with as much care as it should have gotten. But even worse is that it just makes the preceding episodes just feel so draggy and redundant. I think Ultraman X managed to pull the narrative thing quite well, and it was helped by the fact that the actual resolution of things was quite simple in the end. It kinda depends on who you ask. But we have to ask the question, are these problems inherent to shorter series? No. Okay, more accurately, not necessarily. Long series can also be notorious for leaving important plot elements until the very end. Some people say that Ultraman Gaia kind of drags on in the third quarter of the story, with only its final 5 episodes or so finally starting to ramp things up. However, I'd argue that with longer series like Tiga, 7, Return of Ultraman, and Taro, the format is designed that way as an episodic Monster of the Week show, and just having an important plot elements be at the end as a final hurrah to end the string of many wonderful standalone adventures with the characters. On that topic, long series also have an edge with more chances to explore characters in different situations. I don't think that we could have explored Officer Hori getting married in a 25 episode series, for example, because the show just wouldn't have time for it. But this variety can also be a weakness, because when you have so many episodes that ultimately don't change the status quo so much, the episodes can be hit and miss sometimes. Let's look at Ultraman Cosmos for instance. Besides being the series with the most ridiculous length at a whopping 65 episodes and 3 movies, I think it's a bit unfortunate that all people talk about when bringing up Ultraman Cosmos are his pacifism and stuff related to his movies like Justice and Legend and maybe Delacion. I like Cosmos, but I have to admit that a lot of the series is kinda forgettable. Like, does anyone remember when Fubuki and Musashi and Ayano went singing karaoke, or even Musashi's robo friend Gon? And in other series, in shows like Leo or Taro, you have some superb episodes and also some pretty underwhelming ones. But this can also be a symptom of the next point. Long series can also lose track of its direction somewhat. Ultraman Ace is a bit infamous for having its second host Yuko Minami leave the show halfway through, and I believe that the show becomes a shell of its former self after this point. Episodes become more pandering to kids. Yapul was kinda sorta defeated. They introduced a new character that people hated, among others. It felt like they couldn't do what they wanted for the series for the remainder of their run. Another victim of this is again Ultraman Leo. The series started out as a supposedly grittier Ultraman show, but they couldn't fully commit to this, so sometimes you had more fantastical tales, notably the Masterpiece Folklore series. And they even changed the opening song after a few episodes to a more upbeat kiddie theme. I'm still mad about that. But again, we need to consider, are all of these issues and strengths inherently a product of the series' length? Sure, there were more prevalent and common elements in those series, but it's not necessarily because of how long they are. Ultimately, it's what you do with the duration of the series is what matters, and what ultimately decides if it can keep its momentum all the way to the end or limp itself to the finish line. So, back to the question, how long should an Ultraman series be? I would say it depends, but that isn't really a satisfying answer, so while we have to accept that the current status quo of 25-ish episodes for a new show won't change as far as we're aware, I think that around a range of 30 to 35 episodes might be ideal. This is because it gives a succinct enough episode count to spread a main plotline while also having enough room to explore characters and have standalone Monster of the Week stories that the Ultraman franchise does best. We have had some good steps towards this direction, like with Ultraman Decker, Ultraman Z, Ultraman Taiga. They offer some of the really good Monster of the Week episodes from the new generation era. Granted, pacing should still be done well with these kind of shows to balance the Monster of the Week side and the main plot. So, in the end, it's all a really delicate balancing act. This was supposed to be a short one, considering it's just a little question after all. But it turned out pretty long with a lot of viewpoints and stuff. But the long and short of it is... Did you notice the puns I made?